Hey everyone, welcome to episode 2, where we're going to talk about, in a very high level, what cybersecurity is, some of the features, some of the things to consider, some of the areas, but not in great detail. As we initially talked about in episode 1, we would cover high level stuff first and then start getting into the weeds as time goes on. So, in this episode, we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and how we need to care about it, why it's important, and so on. The nutshell on why it's important, though, just so we can kind of skip to the end in some cases, is because of a few reasons. Number one, we like companies that make money. We want our company to make money. You want your company to make money. Number two, we don't want to go to jail and get fined and things like that. And number three, we don't want negative things to happen to our customers. That's in a nutshell. So let's continue on, and we'll get a little bit into the weeds, but not a whole lot. So I hope you have a cup of coffee ready, a glass of water, beer, whatever floats your boat, so we can, start our initial phases in talking about cybersecurity. So what is cybersecurity? So first off, it is the protection of people, information, processes, and corporate environments. So you may wonder, why is it the protection of people? Well, because in security environments, cybersecurity environments, one of the requirements is the protection of human life. And then you may go, why is human life valuable? Well, outside of the obvious reasons, in some cases, a cybersecurity person may be required to contribute, be responsible for things like that, areas in relation to physical security. That person, the cybersecurity professional, may be responsible for that. So the protection of people, it's important because, let's say, for example, your cybersecurity team or individual, assuming it's just one person, or maybe you only have one IT guy in general, and you have a data center that has the requirement to protect the data from fire. The data center, the servers, and so on from fire. So if there is a fire and the sprinkler systems go off and you have people working in the data center in that area, how are you going to make sure they're not electrocuted? Well, one option certainly is to not use water as a fire suppression system. You could use halon, for example. But then again, if you do that, breathing halon will kill you. So you would have to make sure that there's some sort of breathing apparatus, like an oxygen tank or something like that. In a lot of cases, in relation to protection of people, cybersecurity people are responsible for the magnetic door locks in order to get into a building. What if your company viewed the building as a super secure structure and you had to badge in, but you also had to badge out? And there's still a fire in that building, and the person, in the panic of the fire and so on and so forth, had to run out, but they couldn't get outside of the building because of a magnetic door lock that the cybersecurity or the IT person was responsible for. This is all important stuff to think about, but it also goes into the protection of people and the safety of human life and so on. In some companies, and again, a lot of this really has to do with the structure of the company, how big it is, the funding, and so on. So for your really large companies, the cybersecurity guy is probably not going to be the person responsible for magnetic door locks. That's probably going to be the facilities person. And they're probably not going to be responsible on whether or not the halon system is charged and ready to go. That's probably still facilities. But not every company is like that. In some companies, the cybersecurity guy, because it has the word security in it, everything falls under that guy. And in almost all cases, it's not necessarily appropriate, but somebody has to be responsible for it. We also want to protect the company's information. And it could matter, it doesn't really matter what kind of information it is. If either the company or the customer view the information as important, then you have to protect it. It's super important to do that. We also have processes that we might want to protect, like what is the secret sauce? How does a company do something that makes that company special and more revenue generating, things like that. In our case, for Arrakis Consulting, we have our reports that we generate for our assessments, our penetration testing, things like that. Well, certainly for penetration testing, but even just a normal assessment. We view those as obviously sensitive to the customer. But when we are talking through the sales process with a customer on what our reports look like, the template that we use is sensitive to us because it goes into a level of detail that pretty much no other customer or no other competitive company does. But the level of detail and the attention is critical to us that it's important to us. So when a customer says, hey, can you send over that redacted report, that template, we tell them no. We'll be happy to show them on a Zoom call, but we absolutely do not send over templates that could be copied and used by them or somehow lost or things like that. And then also what's important in relation to protecting is the corporate environment in general. And the corporate environment is a very broad term. What does that mean? Well, that means everything. That means understanding HR and how HR is protecting HR data for the employees. It means understanding finance and how finance is protecting, the financial side of things. And it goes all the way up to the CEO and the president, making sure that they're safe, making sure that just because they're the CEO, that doesn't mean they need to have access into the servers. A lot of CEOs have no clue how to spell IT. They know how to run a company, but they have no clue how to actually get down in the weeds and support the servers, do patching, create accounts, things like that. So it's across the board that we really want to care about, people, information, process in the corporate environment. As a former CISO for a $6 billion organization, I had 13,000 employees I had to care about, 1.4 million customers in the end. And going into that job, I figured we'd be dealing with a variety of things, making sure data was protected and making sure people had the right passwords and everything else. I was in for a shock on my first homicide investigation that I had to be involved in, or the protective orders because somebody was cyber stalking another person. Obviously, there's theft across the board. People will steal things, and having had access into the surveillance system, we had to prove a lot of times that people were stealing, and these were all things that I had to do, be involved in as a CISO. Industrial espionage was certainly there. Malicious activity, people just being bad actors and doing the wrong thing. Stalking, embezzlement, all sorts of stuff. All of that I was involved with, and mostly in almost all cases, it's because every single one of those situations involved like a cell phone or a computer or things like that. So we had to do the forensics and everything. There's pretty much nothing that doesn't involve cell phones anymore. So moving along. So why is this important? First off, good cyber hygiene, good cybersecurity is good for business. And companies like business. That's how they pay themselves. That's how they pay, their people. That's how they get bonuses, all that good stuff. So the other good part about having good cyber hygiene in relation to being good for business is that if you take a certification audit like ISO 27001 or SOC 2 or something like that, and you pass, you'll get a badge. And that helps your salespeople sell whatever product or service that your company has. So you really want to have good cyber hygiene because it's good for business. Now, it does cost a little bit to take these audits, but it's worth it. It's worth it in the end. You can publish these certification badges on your website saying, hey, you've got an ISO 27001 and you passed and things like that. I think it's common sense now that if you're looking for a company to do a service and you're doing your competitive research to figure out which one is the best company, and you run across a company that says, we passed an ISO 27001, here's our SOC 2, or so on, they're probably a better company to do business with. It is what it is, though. Yeah, it's good for business. All right, you want to keep your people safe. I did talk about maybe halon and things like that, but safety of life is always the top priority. You can protect the company's information all day long, but if you're not protecting the people that the company depends on, it's kind of pointless in a way. Somebody's got to type on the keyboard. Somebody's got to manage the systems, things like that. We can't assume that the company is more important than the people, especially when the people make up the company. So things to think about in relation to keeping people safe would be like fire suppression systems. I talked about sprinkler systems and halon dumps. How about magnetic door locks? Making sure that only authorized people are inside the building. You don't want homeless individuals just open up any door and start living in your broom closet. If you're going to have cameras to record who enters and leaves a building, you want to make sure those cameras work. You absolutely do not ever want to put up cameras that appear to work but actually don't work, like fake cameras. Not a good idea. You will get in a lawsuit over that. So you want to check for your environmental controls, make sure your air conditioning's working, things like that. Servers get hot, but keep your people safe and comfortable, and so on. But most importantly, it is required in every single regulatory environment to have good cybersecurity hygiene. Any environment that has federally protected data or data that is viewed by the customer as being sensitive is required to be protected. And if you're not protecting the data, or if you're not taking it seriously, you are making a mistake that is going to cost you a lot more money than just doing it right. Now, there are regulatory environments that it's obvious, like a PCI environment or a HIPAA environment. PCI is credit cards, HIPAA is medical, or a banking environment like FFIEC. It's obvious that those are, required as a regulatory framework. But what about companies that feel like I don't have to protect the data because I'm not regulated? There is an agency within the United States called the Federal Trade Commission. The Federal Trade Commission regulates every single company that does business in the United States, including companies that do provide services for free. The Federal Trade Commission, their main purpose is to protect the consumer. So if there is a company that has a service, even free services, or has a single client, the FTC can regulate you. There's no exceptions to this. And anybody who believes that they're totally unregulated, I challenge you to reach out to me so I can explain how you're incorrect. So we want to make sure that we understand that everything is regulated. In fact, I'm just now recalling this, that there was a company called Tower Records. They failed to properly secure data, and the FTC fined them and issued a court order. But this court order was 20 years or maybe 25 years in duration, and it was pretty significant. And if you don't know the company called Tower Records, or you probably like, I haven't heard of Tower Records in quite some time. Well, that's because they went out of business. So it's super important that we understand that just because you feel like you're not regulated, that doesn't mean you aren't regulated. And also understanding that good cyber hygiene, back to the first point, is good for business. Bad cyber hygiene, bad for business. Good cyber hygiene, good for business. So what are some possible threats that we could be exposed to as a company, or have to deal with as a company? First off is a human threat. This is such a wide range of threats, it's crazy. And later on we'll talk about insider threat, but the human threat is actually covers a wide range of factors. So you can have humans making legitimate mistakes because they don't know any better. It's still a threat. That doesn't mean it's intentional, but it's a threat. You can have humans making intentional mistakes because they know better. They know the bad things are going to happen if they do something or whatever. It's still a threat. And then you can also have, I call them, like Curious George. You can have humans that think something's not right, but they're just really curious and they want to see what happens. Or they live on the edge, like, I know this is not right, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen to me this time. So then they do it anyways. It's the same end result. It doesn't really matter whether it's intentional, a mistake, people are being curious or whatever. It's all the same in the end. It's a threat with a negative aspect to it. So I always say human beings are the strongest and the weakest link in cybersecurity at the same time. You'll find people in the cybersecurity chain that know what they're doing. They won't click the link in the phishing email. And then you'll have people in the middle, like, I know this is phishing email. I know I shouldn't click the link, but they click the link anyways. Crazy. And then you have people that just don't know any better, and they're like, what's this? And they click the link because they're either curious or they just don't know any better. And then these are all bad decisions. So to counteract the human threat, best thing you can do realistically is have really good security awareness training that you're teaching people what is good, what is right, what is wrong, things like that. And then you test them. So have random phishing tests that you legitimately put on to see how the testing went. Arrakis Consulting, we offer that service. We offer security awareness training. We offer regular phishing tests that are extremely realistic with a full intention of trying to gauge how the training went. Was it absorbed properly, and so on. Now, does that mean that security awareness training is the only thing you should do to reduce human threat? Absolutely not. But it's absolutely the initial thing that you should do, and it should be ongoing and continuous. So that's certainly there. Another area of reducing the human threat has to do with this term called segregation of duties. So in a lot of areas, this really revolves around financial crimes. And the situation that I always use is where you have the IT guy. He needs a new computer, so he goes and finds a computer. Costs $5,000, and he really wants this computer. So what he does is he submits the request for this $5,000 computer to his manager, but his manager's not there, and the IT guy has the authority to just sign or approve. So he does that. I'm like, okay, cool. So then it goes to the accounting guy, and the accounting guy doesn't know any better, so the IT guy convinces him to write the check, and the check goes out to this IT company that the IT guy identified as the place to get this $5,000 computer. And then coincidentally, the IT company is owned by the IT guy, and the cost of making this computer is really like $1,000 or whatever. So by having a segregation of duties in there, you can have the IT guy put in the request, but you require the manager to review the request, figure out, what do we know about this IT company? Can they do this? What's their warranty like? What's their support like? Now the financial guy, he's probably not going to know one way or the other, but that doesn't mean the financial guy also can't look up the IT company that's going to get this order for a $5,000 computer. Who owns this company? Oh, it's the IT guy, coincidentally. Well, now we have a clear case of segregation of duties that are positive effect. Another area of segregation of duties in relation to cybersecurity is change management. You don't want somebody who wants a change be the approver of the change and then the implementer of the change. Change management should, by regulation, involve more than one person to approve the various areas of the change. But again, a lot of times it boils down into financial crimes and so on. So, but having said that, this can be really challenging for smaller companies or companies that don't have a realistic cybersecurity budget or plan, or don't have qualified cybersecurity people. A lot of companies they'll go around and say, "Oh, Bob, you're an IT guy. You know how to spell IT. You're now the cybersecurity guy," and Bob doesn't know anything. He's the guy who formats computers, installs Microsoft Office, and so on. But because he's an IT guy, he suddenly got thrown under the bus to be a cybersecurity guy. Bad idea. If you can't hire somebody to do actual cybersecurity for these smaller companies, then outsource it. It is a bad idea to assume that just because somebody knows IT that they're also a cybersecurity person, because that is not an accurate belief. Then we also have insider threat. Insider threat is basically, in almost all cases, it's somebody who's pissed off at the company for some reason or another, and they are going out of their way to cause a problem. Could be insider threat, could be formatting servers, deleting files, stealing files, selling them to a competitor. Can also have accidental insider threat, where somebody just doesn't know what they're doing. You could have a person who doesn't really know that if they press the power on this power switch, they assume it affects their computer, but they don't really understand that maybe there's a server plugged into it. There's all sorts of ways you can have insider threats. Now, in relation to what you do for insider threat, some cases it's immediate termination, depending on what the person did or how they did it or things like that. In other cases, you might use it as a training event, so you can properly train people or train people better, or educate them on their poor decision making skills. But again, in other cases, depending on the environment, it could be just a firing offense immediately. I can remember a case where it wasn't necessarily a malicious event, but in a nuclear environment, a person made a mistake and allowed somebody to swap out a keyboard. They didn't recognize a person swapping out a keyboard. They just made a mistake. The guy said he was an IT guy, swapped out a keyboard that had keystroke monitoring on it, and so on. It was all legit, but the reality of it is in this case, the threat came from an insider who allowed the person to go in and switch out a keyboard. That doesn't mean they made a mistake maliciously, but they did make a mistake, and they, in the end, they were terminated because they should have known better. So in some environments, it doesn't matter whether it's malicious or not. You could get fired over that, or you may end up having to fire somebody. But in other cases, maybe not so much. It's generally on a case-by-case basis. But insider threat, just remember, insider threat can be malicious, but it can also be accidental and obviously human-oriented. Now, another thing, inexperience. Huge issue in relation to cybersecurity. There are, as of this recording, there's about 700,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs across the United States. And I think it's like 4 or 5 million across the planet. That means there's a lot of job opportunity for people who have the ability to interview very well, or possibly study for a test and just regurgitate answers but not really understanding anything. There's a lot of people out there that have a fake it till you make it mentality and attitude, and then they get hired, but they're still inexperienced. And what they're really doing is they're using your company as a way to get the experience, which means that they're going to experiment with your company as the guinea pig. They're going to learn things the hard way, but their company's also going to be negatively impacted by that. Or they literally just don't care about the company because they know full well they're going to hold a position doing cybersecurity at this company, and then 1 or 2 years they're going to move on, and the company's not going to be in any better shape than they were before. This happens a lot. We had a client that, I'll just call this guy Bob. Bob went in there. He was a good interviewer. He was very socially acceptable, things like that. Said he had some Cisco certifications. He did not have Cisco certifications. And he basically was just hammer away and call support every time he had a problem. His inexperience cost this company probably well over $500,000 in various support calls and so on in order to help him out. His view on in relation to support was anytime you ordered a server, a router, firewall, switch, workstations, laptops, printers, get the longest amount of support you could on it. And then every single time there was a problem, instead of fixing it himself or using his experience to fix the problem, he would literally sit down and call support and stay on the phone for hours and hours and hours until whatever it was fixed. He was deathly afraid of doing something because he realized that if he ever performed activities on his own, then he would be found out. He was clearly a fake it till you make it kind of guy, and he clearly lied on his resume. So, is it his job to be truthful on the resume? We kind of expect that as companies. We kind of expect people to tell the truth on the documents they're submitting in order to be hired. But the due diligence is on the company. So it should be required that companies perform due diligence. Don't just believe the resumes. Experience can really help you, and inexperience can really hurt you. Now, in some regulations, you actually are required to be certified and experienced, and you have to demonstrate that. And if a company can't or won't do due diligence on people before they're hired, then the company is held accountable for it. Now, even worse, they're held accountable twice. First thing, they're held accountable by the regulation. Second thing, when they figure it out and fire the guy now has the opportunity to sue the company because it's not his job to do due diligence. It's the company's job to do due diligence. And in certain states in the United States, not mentioning any names, California, but that could be a more realistic scenario. Again, not mentioning any state names on that, but so there's a lot of risk in relation to cybersecurity from the standpoint of inexperience. We can also have hacktivism. Hacktivism is basically where it doesn't really matter what you do or how good you are or what your company does. If you have a group of people that simply don't like your company, they're going to attack you. PETA, the people who do like animal rights, who go after companies like cosmetic companies because they're, pouring shampoo into bunny rabbits' eyes or whatever to see what happens. Things like that. They are adamant about going after, different companies in relation to animal rights. Abortion clinics, same things. So you could have, as an IT professional, you might have a client that is an abortion clinic, or maybe you don't know they're an abortion clinic. Maybe there's some other business in abortion clinics on the side, and you just don't know everything that they do because you're an IT guy and this is a medical place. I mean, who knows what they do? There could be attacks in that area, which kind of goes back to the physical aspect of keeping people alive. There's been abortion clinic bombings. It is what it is. You can also have industrial espionage. This is simply for the financial benefit from one company to another. And it also, in a lot of cases, boils back into insider threat. So it's not uncommon for company A to hire somebody from company B and unethically and quite often illegally say, you know what, if you happen to have a copy of the client base or maybe something else from your company on your way out, we won't hold it against you. First off, this is illegal in all sorts of different ways, but companies do this so they don't have to do research and development, or they have some sort of inside track on some other hand to help to be more competitive. A great example of industrial espionage has to do with China. China loves to take as much data as they can from U.S.-based companies. The U.S.-based company spends all millions and millions and millions of dollars on research and development, and then it gets stolen by the Chinese, and they don't spend that money, but they come up with something very similar. If you look at the fighter jets that the U.S. has and the fighter jets that China has, they're strangely similar. Who knows why? Got a feeling, I got an idea, but who knows why? I do recall a case where the Chinese individuals were working for a company that they were developing grain, like wheat and things like that. the U.S. company spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on the development of this grain and wheat and so on. And if I remember correctly, the sole purpose behind this was that this wheat was more resistant to drought. It could still grow even with not that much water. And obviously the Chinese wanted that. They didn't want to spend the money on the research and development, and they just wanted it. Anyways, these guys were caught by the FBI and arrested, went to jail, and things like that. So industrial espionage is all over the place. There's always going to be a case of insider threat, which is also always going to have some sort of human interaction to it. So you can see that it kind of ties, all of it can tie together. And of course, inexperience on the part of the human or the part of the people protecting the data, that could all be in there as well. So what can happen with a poor cybersecurity environment? Well, we already talked about industrial espionage and people stealing data, but there's also ransomware. Untrained users will click the link, and if they click the link and it's attached to ransomware, they will encrypt data that may or may not be sensitive to the company, and it may or may not cost the company a lot of money to get the data back. So in cases of ransomware, it could be a situation where the company has to look at the data that's being ransomed or held hostage. What is the value of it? If it's a $10 worth of data and they're wanting $100 for the ransom, then just reformat, start over. If it's the opposite, if it's $1 million worth of data and they want $100,000 to get the key, well, maybe you should consider paying the ransom. There's a catch to this though, and I'll tell you that in a minute. But you might also want to have an evaluation of your cybersecurity program. How often was this device backed up? Do you have more than one device? When did the ransom kick in? Have you figured out what technology created the ransomware event? Was it a particular file? Then maybe it's just restore data and move on, and then educate the person on not clicking on the links. There is that. Now let's say that, and this is just a scenario, let's say none of that happened. It's valuable data. It's $1 million worth of data, and they want you to pay them $10,000. And they're saying the longer you wait, the price goes up. Obviously, they're doing that because it's human nature to kind of reduce risk and be a little impulsive in things. So what you should be aware of if you ever do get in a ransomware environment and you actually do consider paying the money, is that actually could be viewed as a crime in itself. That's unfortunate, and the reason why is a lot of these places that have ransomware and hold data hostage, unless you're absolutely sure they're not connected to a terrorist organization in some way or another, you could actually be funding terrorism by doing that, and that absolutely is illegal. Can't fund terrorism. So it's generally the viewpoint amongst the attorney generals and so on that, and the FBI recommends this as well, if you do run across a ransomware environment or ransomware situation, is don't pay the money, call the FBI. If you do pay the money, understand you might be facing charges. But even then, if you notify the FBI and it's a common ransomware that's going on, they're going to know about that across the United States or across the world, and they might have the decryption keys and they'll just give them to you. So we have that. What could happen is ransomware. You can also just basically lose data or intellectual property, kind of going back into industrial espionage and corporate espionage. FYI, don't be the company that hires a person away from another company and offer to look the other way when they bring over data. You'd be breaking the law. So it's important that you understand that. That's why almost every company now has non-disclosure agreements that says you are still required to protect. If you have sensitive information from another company, you are still required to protect that data, even though you don't work for them anymore. And they remind you of this because they don't want data that they illegitimately got. It can put the new company at risk. However, what's really, or can be really bad, is if your customers are compromised. This can be horrible. Losing data, having ransomware, that's that's certainly not good. But once your customers are breached, once they're individually affected or affected as a group, whatever, you may be in a position as a company, because you have poor cybersecurity hygiene, where you have to notify these individuals, where you have to make a public statement, uh, and in some cases you may be legally obligated to do that. And what I mean by that is, if you don't do it, you are breaking the law and you can be facing charges. So customers compromise, worst case scenario, that's really, 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 really bad. Don't want to do that. And as a part of, having a compromised customer, you can have negative publicity, because once you notify customers, they're probably going to do something about it. That might be in the news, and so on and so forth. So we want to really avoid any sort of negative publicity, in general. So for example, in 2013, Target was breached, and as a result of that breach, it was pretty significant. They spent a lot of money fixing it, but they also had to publicly declare it, because, like, who wasn't affected by the Target breach? As a result of that, Target lost 46% of their revenue, not because of the breach, but also because of the fines they had to pay, because of the changes they had to make, but most definitely because of the negative publicity that they got. CNN and Fox News and any other news station, when there's a big breach like that, it's going to be in the news for a long time. This is negative advertising. You want to avoid it. You can also get unwanted attention. As a part of the breach, you may get unwanted attention, from news agencies, but also from federal regulators or federal law enforcement agencies. Every company has secrets. I like to think that there's no company out there that intentionally breaks the law, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen accidentally. But there could be, based on whatever happens, there could be situations where a company could be faced with external oversight, where a company has to have, like, third-party assessors or maybe a federal regulator who also is an auditor come in and look at things. The banking environment has that. It can be very difficult. You really want to kind of protect your company as much as you can by having a good cybersecurity program, so you can avoid external attention that is court ordered. And again, in some cases, like if the FBI is getting into your business because you made a mistake on something, and they're in there and they start poking around and finding something, if they find something else that should be fixed, that's maybe less than legal, they're obligated to do something about it. So I'm not saying the FBI is bad or that you should avoid talking to them, but I am saying that if a federal regulator comes in to check out something and they find something else, they are obligated to do something about it. And it's important that you protect yourself so that doesn't happen. Obviously, revenue loss. I already talked about Target losing 46%. I think, if I remember correctly, just in relation to the Target breach, they were fined or agreed to settle for $19 million to the various state attorney general's offices for that breach. So the attorney generals themselves weren't breached, and the state wasn't breached, but because all these states got involved, Target had to pay out $19 million. And I want to say that in the end, because of what happened to Target, their overall revenue loss was around, I don't know, 100 million. I could be wrong. It could be a lot more, but 100 million is a lot to me. You can also have sanctions. Sanctions are super important to understand. Basically, sanctions are bad things that can happen to you. You can have financial sanctions, fines, so on. So a PCI environment, you get fined a lot, and it's sometimes by the day. In other cases, you can have sanctions through the court, where you might, until you do something, you're going to pay $10,000 a day until it's done and you can prove it. It could be bad. Other sanctions could be, depending on the line of business your company's in, you could be banned for life from participating in something. So if I remember correctly, one of the persons in the Wells Fargo situation, That guy is, I don't remember the name, but that guy was banned for life from participating in anything financial related. So imagine, you go to school, you learn how to do something, you spend 10, 20 years doing that, and then you make a mistake, and then all of a sudden you're banned for life from participating in that entire industry. That would absolutely not be good. You can have civil lawsuits can be filed against a company. You can have criminal lawsuits as well. And in some cases, if you make a mistake within a company, because like say you're the cybersecurity guy and you have poor cybersecurity hygiene and you just don't do anything about it, either because of negligence, inexperience, the person's lazy, who knows what, and something happens, and then you go, wow, I really screwed up. You know what, I'm just going to resign and leave because obviously I've screwed up. They've lost faith in me, whatever. There's been cases where just because you screwed up and left the company, that doesn't mean that the liability doesn't follow you as an individual. And that can happen at all levels, including the leadership level, where the CEO of a company, resigns from his position, moves on to somewhere else, and it follows him, over there. Now, what can happen though is, we talked about all these different areas. So what can also happen is a combination of all the above. You could have negative publicity, revenue loss, sanctions, criminal charges, and so on and so forth. All of that could have happened, all of it, essentially, or maybe portions of it. So I think it's important to point out that good cyber hygiene, good cybersecurity, it's not only for, what we said, what could happen, why it's important, or the threats, things like that. It's important to understand is from a business standpoint, it's what's going to help keep your business in business. It's what's going to help you, develop more business. It's going to make it easier for your salespeople because the salespeople can say, hey, we have a SOC 2 badge or we have an ISO 27001 certificate. It's going to help. What is not going to help, and this happens a lot, are the CEOs, the presidents, the senior leaders, executives, whatever, that don't understand cybersecurity. That, they have a business, they're making $100 million a year, and they dedicate $1 million to the cybersecurity front of things to protect the company. That's not good. And it does unfortunately happen a lot where companies really don't understand what they have to do in relation to cybersecurity. They view it as overhead, as a non-revenue generating overhead that is really only there because they have to do it. So they do the bare minimum. That's not right. That's not the right thought process to have. So, and with that, we're at the end of our episode 2 for this. Appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I highly suggest subscribe to our YouTube channel, watch some of the other videos. If you have comments, feel free to leave them. Definitely interested in everybody's opinion. And again, we're not trying to be down in the weeds on this stuff. We're trying to be high level. Future seminar videos will be more in the weeds. And as the year goes on, we're just going to get down into the dirt in relation to these weeds that we're looking at. But yeah, definitely appreciate everybody's time, and thank you for everything. Talk to you guys soon. See ya.